Have you ever poured your heart into something, like a project, maybe a relationship, a big goal,
Hmm.
only for it to feel like, well, nothing much came of it?
Oh, absolutely. And then maybe other things, efforts you barely thought about, they just bloom. It happens.
It really does.
Mm.
And we're often so obsessed with seeing results now, that instant success.
Mm.
But what if the really transformative stuff, the outcomes with real staying power, need a totally different approach?
A different kind of vision, yeah. Something deeper than just, immediate gratification.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into it. Our source is called The Theology of Sowing. And forget just farms and fields for a second.
Right, this goes way beyond agriculture.
Yeah, the source is presented as a fundamental kingdom mandate, like a divine blueprint for how God's principles work in, well, pretty much every part of life. Leadership, influence, everything.
And it totally reframes how we look at perseverance, doesn't it? It shows why those tough efforts, the ones that feel like they're going nowhere, are actually never wasted.
Even when the wheat feels impossible long.
It's true. For so many people, I think the act of giving or serving, maybe speaking out, it can feel so uncertain. You put yourself out there and maybe silence.
Or worse, pushback.
Right. And without a solid grounding, a theological foundation for it, those challenges, they can look a lot like failure, just plain failure.
But the source material really flips that script. It argues it's about understanding that every single seed, every effort sown in obedience carries, like, profound significance.
Even if you can't see the fruit yet, or maybe you never see it personally, this deep dive hopefully will offer some real clarity on that, some direction, a way to think about lasting impact.
And right at the heart of it all, we found this verse popping up again and again, Galatians 6:9. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up.
Which sounds nice, like encouragement, but the sources treat it as more than that.
Yeah, more like a strategy, a blueprint for sticking with it faithfully, understanding that our efforts fit into a much bigger, sovereign plan.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Sowing. Like you said, the image that jumps to mind is a farmer, scattering seeds. Easy picture.
But our sources say, hold on, it's way bigger. It goes far beyond literal farming. So what is the real nature of this kingdom mandate they talk about?
Well, one of the key things that comes through is how easily it's misunderstood. People tend to see sowing as transactional, simple cause and effect. You give, you get, right away.
Like putting a coin in a vending machine.
Kind of, yeah. But Scripture reframes it completely. It's shown as this enduring rhythm, faith and expectation working together over time.
So not just a task you tick off a list.
No, not at all. It's presented as a profound way of life, an intentional partnership, really, that brings together obedience, vision, and spiritual strategy. You're participating in God's bigger plan.
And the reality is, this isn't easy. The stakes feel pretty high sometimes because the sowing, it doesn't happen in some perfect little greenhouse, does it?
No, definitely not. It's happening out in the world where there's resistance, indifference, sometimes outright opposition, especially when you're talking about ministry or leadership today.
And how we respond to that resistance. That's crucial.
Precisely. The sources really emphasize that our confidence, our reason for continuing to sow, shouldn't rest on how good the soil looks right now.
Not on predictable results.
Exactly. But on the certainty of God's promise, his character. If you don't anchor your efforts in that theology, the risk of burnout is huge. Frustration sets in.
And you might miss what God is actually doing.
You might miss the opportunities to align with his purposes.
Yeah.
It really comes down to understanding the why behind your sowing. That why, rooted in God's word, becomes your compass through those tough seasons.
Okay, so this idea is foundational. And what's really interesting looking through the sources is just how ancient this concept is. It's not new. They trace it right back to the very beginning.
Yeah, it's amazing. The sources point out that the Bible actually introduces God as the first sower.
Wow.
Yeah, think about it. From Genesis right through to Revelation, this whole narrative arc of sowing and harvest is central. It establishes a fundamental pattern.
How so in Genesis?
Well, creation itself uses agricultural language. You have seed-bearing plants in Genesis 1, designed with this built-in potential for multiplication.
Right, I remember that.
And then humanity gets the job to work and keep the garden, Genesis 2.15. So God isn't just the creator who sets things up, he's also the original cultivator. He's planting life into the soil, planting humanity into creation, planting eternity into time itself.
So sowing is woven into the fabric of creation. It's about participating in God's design from the get-go.
That's how the source is presented. It's fundamental.
Okay, so God is the first sower, then Jesus. He picks up this metaphor in his teaching, but in a way that seems to completely turn our worldly ideas of success upside down.
He really does. He wasn't talking about military might or political strategies for his kingdom. He talked about seeds.
The parable of the sower, right? That's
Oh.
probably the most famous one.
Exactly. Matthew 13, Mark 4, Luke 8. It's in all the synoptics. And it really unpacks the mystery of the kingdom. It shows how it's both incredibly fragile, like a tiny seed.
But also unstoppable in its potential.
Right. He describes seeds landing everywhere. Some just get snatched up immediately. Some sprout but wither fast because there's no root. Some get choked out by weeds.
Life's worries and distractions.
Precisely. And then some seed lands on good soil and produces an amazing harvest. The lesson is pretty sobering. You're not going to get immediate, visible results from every single seed you sow. It's just not guaranteed.
But the job is still to scatter the seed anyway.
That's the mandate. Because the harvest doesn't depend on the sower controlling everything. It depends on the soil's receptivity and ultimately on God's sovereignty.
And he also used the mustard seed analogy, didn't he? The tiniest seed growing into something huge.
Yes, which completely reframes success. Small beginnings, seemingly insignificant acts can have this completely disproportionate impact in God's kingdom. It defies our logic.
So it's not always about the big, flashy efforts.
Often it's not. And then if you're looking for the most radical act of sowing, the sources point to the cross.
The cross itself is sowing. Wow, can you unpack that a bit? That's profound.
It really is. Jesus himself said it in John 12. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much fruit.
So his death wasn't just an end.
It was the ultimate sowing. His death and resurrection completely reframed sowing as this act of sacrificial investment, an act of total surrender that actually births eternal life for everyone who believes.
That's the kingdom's logic, isn't it? Completely counterintuitive.
Utterly. True fruitfulness isn't born from trying to control everything or needing certainty. It comes from surrender, from trust. It's the Son, given to death, buried like a seed, raised up to bring this unbelievable harvest of salvation for everyone.
That act of surrender,
Mm-hmm.
it really does redefine fruitfulness.
Yeah.
Okay, so if this principle underpins creation, Jesus' teachings, even the cross, how does this theology of sowing actually touch, us, our normal everyday lives right now?
Yeah, that's the crucial question, isn't it? How does it land? And the sources emphasize that we need to see sowing not just as one big thing we do occasionally, but as this multidimensional mandate. It applies everywhere.
Okay, like what? What dimensions are we talking about?
Well, the sources break it down into several key areas. First, there's sowing in faith. Think about every quiet prayer whispered, every word of encouragement you give someone, even unseen acts of kindness.
Things nobody else might notice.
Exactly. Those are seeds planted in eternity. Choosing to trust God when things are uncertain, that's a seed of faith, and the sources say it has unseen potential.
Okay, faith. What else?
Then there's sowing in relationships. Things like reconciliation, choosing forgiveness when it's hard, mentoring someone. These are really vital seeds for restoring connections that sin or brokenness has fractured.
So like choosing to understand someone in a tough conversation instead of just being defensive.
Yes, that's a perfect example. You might not see that seed sprout for years, maybe never fully, but the sources insist its potential for healing is immense.
Right. Okay, faith, relationships.
Then sowing in work and vocation. Striving for excellence in your job, acting with integrity as a leader, being creative in your business or craft. All these things sow seeds that actually bear witness to God's kingdom right there in the marketplace.
So even just doing your job well with integrity, even when no one's watching, that's sowing.
Absolutely. You're sowing value, trustworthiness, diligence into the world. It matters. Then there's sowing in generosity.
Giving money, resources.
Yeah, financial giving, sharing what you have. The sources frame this not as loss, but as investment. Paul says it in 2 Corinthians 9, whoever sows generously will also reap generously. It's a deliberate act of releasing control, trusting in a divine return that might not be financial.
Trust again.
It keeps coming back to trust. And finally, maybe the hardest one, sowing in suffering.
Wow. How can suffering be sowing?
It sounds counterintuitive, but the sources point to Psalm 126, which says, tears can water the soil for future joy. Our pain, our trials, when we entrust them to God and walk through them with faith, they can become seeds. Seeds of witness, deeper empathy, a testimony that helps others.
That's powerful. So even the really hard stuff isn't wasted.
Nothing is wasted in God's economy, according to this theology. It's amazing to realize that those small, consistent things, being kind to that difficult coworker, patiently explaining something again, praying for someone day after day, these are actually seeds.
Seeds with eternal potential.
Designed to multiply way beyond what we can see right now, often in ways we might never fully grasp on this side of eternity.
Okay, but let's be real. We've all been there. You pour energy and heart into something, and it just feels ignored or dismissed.
Oh.
Maybe even actively resisted.
Yeah, that hard soil experience.
Exactly. And it is so easy to feel like a failure. Like you just wasted your time and energy. But you mentioned this theology has a different way of looking at that.
It really does, and this is crucial. The sources argue that rejection isn't proof of your failure. In fact, it can be confirmation that a spiritual battle is being waged.
Wait, say that again? Confirmation.
Yes. Remember the parable of the sower? Jesus explicitly talks about different kinds of resistant soil. The hardened path, the rocky ground, the thorny patch.
Right.
Those aren't just farming tips. They represent real human responses, hardened hearts, shallow commitment, lives choked by worldly pressures. And they represent the reality of spiritual resistance.
Like Ephesians 6 says, our struggle isn't against flesh and blood.
Precisely. But against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world. That perspective shift is huge. It helps cultivate resilience, patience, a long-term view. You start to realize the pushback might not be about you personally.
It's part of a larger unseen conflict.
Exactly, which totally reframes what feels like failure.
Okay, that is a powerful reframing.
Yeah.
But for someone right in the middle of that, feeling that intense pushback, what's the internal shift needed to really grab hold of that idea? To see resistance not as a stop sign, but as, well, confirmation.
That internal shift really comes from anchoring your why. Why are you doing this in the first place? Is it for the immediate visible results? Or is it rooted in obedience to God's call to sow?
So detaching from the outcome again.
Yes. Think about the historical examples the sources often point to. Prophets like Jeremiah, mocked, imprisoned for decades.
Right. His whole life felt like failure by worldly standards.
Exactly. Or the apostles like Paul facing shipwrecks, beatings, constant opposition. Their perseverance wasn't just about gritting their teeth and getting through it. It was active. It was laying the groundwork for future transformation, often generations later.
They're playing the long game.
They absolutely were. They understood their job was to sow faithfully, regardless of how the soil looked right then. Persistent sowing, even when it's hard, is essential kingdom work.
So the takeaway is that no faithful act, no seed sown in obedience is ever truly wasted, even if it feels totally useless in the moment.
It contributes to God's bigger story. It influences things in ways we often can't see. The fruit might be hidden or delayed, but it's never pointless.
Okay, so if our job is to keep sowing, even on that tough ground, who actually makes things grow, are we ultimately responsible for the results? Because that pressure feels immense sometimes.
It does, and that's a really important question that many people wrestle with, that burden of performance, of needing to produce results.
Yeah.
But the sources offer such clarity here. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 3, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow.
Okay.
And then he continues, so neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. That right there, that's the liberating heart of this whole theology.
Liberating, how so?
Because it means our calling is to be faithful in the sowing, the miracle part, the growth, the timing, the abundance of the harvest that belongs entirely to God.
Wow. Okay, that does lift a weight. It means we can focus on our part, the obedience of sowing.
Without being crushed by the pressure of having to control the results, or feeling like a personal failure if things don't explode overnight.
Right, but then how do we avoid swinging the other way? You know, becoming passive, just sitting back thinking, oh, well, God will handle it, and not actually doing the sowing.
That's a really critical balance to strike, because the mandate is to sow. It's an active call. It requires our obedience, our effort, our participation.
It's a partnership.
Exactly. God's role includes his perfect timing, his power to bring life out of dormancy, to turn resistance into receptivity, to take our small acts of faith and create exponential impact. Remember those parables in Matthew 13?
The harvest being 30, 60, 100 times what was sown.
Yes. That kind of multiplication defies our normal math. It's supernatural. Understanding this frees us from being anxious about the specific outcome of any one seed. It empowers us to just get on with the work with joy, trusting that God is orchestrating this unseen harvest that's way bigger than our calculations.
So our obedience activates his power.
That's a great way to put it. Our faithful sowing is the catalyst for his miraculous growth.
Okay, this is all incredibly insightful. So how do we actually live this out? How do we bring all this into our daily lives and become those intentional, hopeful, persevering sowers the sources describe?
Well, the material suggests several really practical things. First, actively cultivate a long-term vision. We have to consciously resist our culture's obsession with instant results.
Which is everywhere.
It really is. But kingdom impact, true transformation, often unfolds slowly, over years, sometimes even generations. Patience is key.
Okay, long-term vision. What else?
Second, embrace consistency over intensity. Those daily, faithful acts of obedience, they often matter much more in the long run than occasional big dramatic bursts of passion. Just keep showing up, keep sowing those small seeds.
Consistency. Got it.
Third, try to discern the soil. This doesn't mean giving up on hard ground, but it does mean using wisdom. Not every single opportunity or interaction will bear the same kind of fruit. But, crucially, don't use potentially poor soil as an excuse to just do nothing.
Find the balance between wisdom and obedience.
Exactly. And then there's something you mentioned earlier that really stood out in the sources too, the idea of having a personal why.
Right. Developing that clear purpose.
Yes. And it's more than just like a motivational slogan. It's presented as a spiritual compass. It anchors why you're sowing, not in getting immediate results, not in getting approval from people.
But in what?
In participating with God's eternal purposes. It answers that core question, why am I doing this? And knowing that why transforms the labor into worship. It turns service into a true vocation. And it fuels endurance with joy, especially when the path gets really difficult.
So whether it's those small acts of kindness we talked about or consistently mentoring someone, maybe advocating for justice, it all matters. Every seed has its purpose in that bigger picture.
Absolutely. And maybe finally, the sources stress anchoring your hope firmly in the harvest God promises. Not necessarily a harvest you will see or control, but the ultimate harvest. And commit to consistent prayer over your sowing.
Because prayer connects our efforts to God's power.
Precisely. Because faithful sowing, sustained by that kind of unwavering hope and obedience, that's what reshapes communities. That's what influences generations. It's about trusting God to multiply what we faithfully release.
Which really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
Or-
Are my efforts just habitual? Or are they intentionally aligned with this bigger kingdom vision, one that can actually withstand resistance and disappointment?
Yeah. What seeds might you be holding on to, maybe out of fear or a need for control that God actually wants you to sow? Seeds that could yield incredible impact down the line, far beyond what you can imagine right now.
Wow. Well, today we've taken a really deep dive into this profound theology of sowing. We've seen how the source is presented as a divine mandate that can really transform uncertainty into opportunity.
And redefine rejection, seeing it not as failure, but as part of the spiritual landscape we navigate.
Yeah, elevating even our small, everyday acts into something with eternal significance.
It really is a powerful call, isn't it? A call to embrace courage, consistency, and just this unrelenting hope, knowing that while, yeah, we're responsible for the sowing part.
The faithfulness in planting.
Right. But the growth, the
Yeah.
timing, the abundant harvest, that's God's sovereign work. Our role is faithful planting. His role is cultivation and transformation.
So as you go about your day, maybe think about this truth we found in the sources. The destiny of a seed is never realized until it leaves the hand.
That's good. So the question for all of us really is, what seed will you choose to sow today? Trusting God with that unseen harvest, the one that might stretch far beyond what your eyes can see right now, maybe even into generations yet unborn.